everyone, and welcome to a deep dive crafted just for you. Ever feel like you're in a constant battle with procrastination?
Oh, absolutely.
Like that to-do list is judging you.
Yeah.
Well, today we're dissecting the work of Dr. Kevin Jubbal. He's a physician and entrepreneur who's all about making learning more efficient. And hopefully by the end, we can understand how to really conquer those procrastination urges.
And the best part, this isn't about becoming like some kind of productivity robot. It's about using simple, practical strategies to work smarter, not harder.
Music to my ears.
Yeah.
So Dr. Jubbal has this really cool concept that he calls the motivation equation. Sounds kind of mathy, right?
Yeah.
But trust me, it's incredibly insightful.
Well, you see, what's fascinating is that he's not just throwing motivational quotes at the problem. He's really like breaking down the very nature of motivation into a formula so we can understand and manipulate. It's like a sneak peek into the control panel of your own brain.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does this motivation equation work? What makes it so powerful?
It's surprisingly simple. Imagine this. Motivation equals expectancy times value divided by impulsiveness times delay.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's unpack that.
Let's do it. Break it down.
Yeah.
So think about a time you had to choose between, say, cleaning your room
Yeah.
and tackling some complex work project. Which one made you want to hide under the covers?
Oh, definitely the work project. My room could be a disaster zone, and I'd still find a way to avoid that project.
Exactly. And that's where that expectancy comes in. You know, it's about how confident you feel about succeeding. The work project, with all its unknowns, probably had at least you doubting yourself, even before you began. Low expectancy equals low motivation. But if you felt good about your cleaning skills, and you knew you could make your room sparkle, well, that's high expectancy, and suddenly cleaning seems less daunting.
That makes so much sense. So it's not just about the task itself, but our perception of it?
Precisely. And it's not just about confidence either. Remember value from the equation. How much do you genuinely care about the outcome?
So if I'm like dreading a work task, but I know it'll land me a promotion, that's high value, right? Even if the expectancy is low, the motivation might still be there because the reward is worth it.
Exactly. You've cracked the code. Think about things you naturally gravitate towards. Maybe it's reading, painting, playing a musical instrument. Chances are those activities hold high value for you. You enjoy the process or the outcome. And when you value something, you're naturally more motivated to do it.
It's like that feeling of getting lost in a good book. Time just seems to disappear because you're so engrossed.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Our brains aren't always logical. Remember that impulsiveness factor? Yeah, our modern world is a minefield of distractions, all vying for our attention.
Oh, tell me about it. Social media notifications, emails popping up, that irresistible urge to see what's trending. It's a constant battle to stay focused.
And that's why understanding this part of the equation is so important. It's not about eliminating distractions entirely, but about being aware of their power and putting strategies in place to manage them.
So being mindful of those tempting distractions and how they derail our best intentions.
Exactly. And then there's the final piece of the puzzle, delay. This one's all about how our brains are wired to prioritize immediate gratification over long-term rewards.
This is me to a T. That piece of chocolate cake is way more enticing than the promise of fitting into my skinny jeans a month from now, even though I know logically that's the better choice.
It's a classic example of delay in action. Our brains are wired to favor the here and now. It takes conscious effort to override that instinct and make choices that align with our long-term goals.
It's like our brain needs like a crash course in delayed gratification.
Yeah.
But knowing all of this, how do we actually use this motivation equation to combat procrastination? Like, it's one thing to understand it, but how do we put it into practice?
That's where Dr. Jubbal's 7 actionable steps come in. He doesn't just leave you with a formula.
Yeah.
He gives you the tools to actually rewire your habits.
Okay, so walk us through these 7 steps. What's the first line of defense?
The first step is deceptively simple. Break it down. Think about those massive projects that make you want to run for the hills. What makes them so overwhelming?
Oh, absolutely.
It's the sheer size and complexity.
It's like staring up at Mount Everest and knowing you have to climb it. The thought alone is exhausting.
Exactly. So instead of tackling the entire mountain, Dr. Jubbal suggests breaking those monstrous tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks. He actually uses a detailed study schedule where he outlines specific lectures and practice problems for each day. But this approach, though, might not work for everyone.
Right, some of us thrive on a bit more flexibility. So how do we find that balance between structure and freedom?
It's about finding what works for you. Maybe it's a detailed schedule, or perhaps it's just jotting down 3 key goals for the day. The point is, by breaking things down, you're boosting that expectancy factor we talked about. Each small step feels achievable, making you more likely to get started.
So instead of focusing on the entire climb, you're concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other.
Precisely. And once you've got those smaller chunks, Dr. Jubbal introduces a technique I think you'll appreciate, given your penchant for distractions, the Pomodoro Technique.
Okay, I've heard of this one. It's all about those focused 25-minute work sprints, right? But how does that actually help with procrastination?
It plays brilliantly on our brain's need for achievable goals. Instead of getting bogged down by the thought of working for hours on end, you commit to a mere 25 minutes.
That feels so much less daunting than an entire afternoon glued to my desk.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it. You trick your brain into thinking it's no big deal, you're more likely to get started. And often, once you're in the flow, you'll keep going even after the timer goes off.
It's like building momentum. Small victories lead to bigger accomplishments. Okay, so we've broken things down. We're using the Pomodoro Technique to stay on track. What's next?
Now, this next step might seem a little counterintuitive, but it's a game changer. Dr. Jubbal calls it the low bar strategy.
Okay, low bar. That doesn't
What?
sound very ambitious. Explain this one.
I know, right? It seems counterproductive. But it's all about outsmarting your brain's tendency to get overwhelmed. Dr. Jubbal shares a story about his own struggles with meditation. He was aiming for 20 minutes daily, but always found excuses.
Oh, I've been there. Set the bar high, only to feel defeated when I can't maintain it.
Exactly. So he decided to try something radical. He lowered the bar to just 2 minutes each day.
2 minutes, that's it?
That's it. And guess what? It worked. He found himself meditating almost every day. And often those 2 minutes would turn into 10 or 15. He'd surpassed his initial goal without the pressure.
So it's like tricking your brain into forming a new habit by making the entry point incredibly easy.
Precisely. And this applies to so many areas of life. Think about a time you were putting off a task. Maybe it was going for a run or cleaning the kitchen. The thought of a full workout or a spotless kitchen felt overwhelming if you did nothing.
All the time.
But what if instead of aiming for perfection, you set a ridiculously achievable goal? Just 5 minutes of exercise or cleaning one counter. Suddenly it doesn't feel so bad, right?
Right.
You're more likely to take action. And who knows, you might just surprise yourself by going beyond that initial goal.
I love that. It takes the pressure off. It's not about doing it perfectly. It's about doing something. It's like that saying, perfection is the enemy of good. Sometimes just getting started is the biggest hurdle.
Exactly. And speaking of hurdles, let's talk about how to make the tasks themselves more appealing. Remember that value component from the motivation equation? Dr. Jubbal's next tip is all about injecting a little enjoyment into our work.
Because who wants to spend all their time doing things they hate? Life's too short for that.
Couldn't agree more. Now, we can't always choose tasks we love, but we can find ways to make them a little less dreadful. Think about it. Are there certain things that make work more enjoyable for you?
Oh, absolutely. A good playlist can totally change my mood. I also find having like a dedicated workspace, even if it's just a corner of my kitchen table, it helps me get in the zone. It's like signaling to my brain that it's time to focus.
Exactly. You're creating an environment that supports your productivity. It could be as simple as lighting a scented candle or brewing a fresh cup of coffee. And don't underestimate the power of rewards.
Oh, rewards are essential. Tell me, what's your go-to reward after conquering a particularly challenging task?
Honestly, a quiet walk in nature does wonders for me. It's a chance to clear my head and recharge. Or it could be anything. Reading a chapter of a book, catching an episode of your favorite show, or indulging in a delicious treat. The key is to have something to look forward to.
It's all about finding those little things that bring you joy and integrating them into your workday. Okay, so we've covered breaking things down, using the Pomodoro Technique, setting the bar low, and making work enjoyable. What else can we do to outsmart our procrastinating brains?
Well, we can't talk about procrastination without addressing deadlines. And this is where Dr. Jubbal introduces us to a fascinating concept, Parkinson's Law. Have you ever noticed how work seems to expand to fill the time we allot for it?
Oh, tell me about it. Give me a week to complete a task and I'll magically find ways to stretch it out, even if it could have been done in 2 days.
Exactly. That's Parkinson's Law in action. But here's the good news. We can use this law to our advantage by setting artificial deadlines.
So even if I have a week to finish a project, I should set a personal deadline for sooner.
Precisely. By creating a sense of urgency, you're essentially manipulating that delay factor in the motivation equation. The reward feels closer. which boosts your motivation.
So it's like a little white lie to your brain. You're not actually changing the deadline, but you're making it feel more immediate.
Exactly. Of course, you don't want to set unrealistic deadlines and create unnecessary stress. It's about finding that sweet spot, a balance between urgency and achievability.
Makes sense. So we're playing mind games with our procrastination, but in a good way. What's next on Dr. Jubbal's list of procrastination-busting strategies?
The next step might seem obvious, but it's often overlooked. Minimize distractions. We live in a world that is just saturated with information, and it's so easy to get pulled in a million directions.
Oh, don't I know it? My phone is like a magnet for distractions. Social media, news alerts, emails. It's a constant battle to stay focused.
It's that impulsivity factor rearing its ugly head. But here's the thing. You have more control than you think.
Okay, so how do we actually combat those distractions? What are some practical tips?
Start by creating a distraction-free zone. This might mean putting your phone on airplane mode, silencing notifications, or using website blockers to keep those tempting tabs at bay. It's about setting yourself up for success.
So it's about creating boundaries, both physical and digital, to protect our focus.
Exactly. And it's not just about external distractions. Sometimes our own minds can be our worst enemies, right?
Oh, those racing thoughts and to-do lists. That pop into my head at the worst possible moments. Definitely guilty of that.
That's why mindfulness is so crucial. Have you ever tried techniques like meditation or deep breathing?
I've dabbled in meditation, but honestly, I haven't found a practice that sticks. It's on my list to explore further.
It's worth it. Even a few minutes of mindfulness each day can make a world of difference. It's about training your mind to stay present and resist those tempting distractions, both internal and external.
So it's like building a mental muscle. The more you exercise that mindfulness muscle, the stronger it becomes.
Exactly. And that brings us to Dr. Jubbal's final and perhaps most crucial point. Know thyself.
Because what works for one person might not work for another, right? We all have our own unique quirks and preferences.
Precisely. Dr. Jubbal emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to procrastination. What motivates one person might completely demotivate another. He actually has a great video on the 4 tendencies that delves into this further. We'll be sure to include a link in the show notes.
Yes, we'll make sure you have access to that. It sounds fascinating. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The motivation equation, 7 actionable steps, and the importance of self-awareness. What's the one key takeaway you hope listeners will walk away with?
That procrastination is not a life sentence. It's a challenge we can overcome with the right strategies and a willingness to understand our own minds.
It's about working smarter, not harder, and finding what truly motivates us.
Exactly. So the next time you find yourself facing a daunting task or battling those procrastination urges, remember this conversation. You have the tools to conquer procrastination.
Well said. It's time to ditch those feelings of overwhelm and embrace the power of action. That's a wrap on another deep dive. Until next time, happy tackling those to-do lists.